Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of President CAS, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, I welcome you all today to the book launch ceremony. CAS has developed a reputation for the solid intellectual outputs that it produces, and today's event marks another great achievement for CAS. The third book in the past 3 years, Dr. Usman Chohan's third book, titled Public Value and the Digital Economy, is at the cutting edge of the public value theory and is a significant and original contribution to the field of public administration. Dr. Chohan's previous 2 books, while at CAS, were titled Public Value and Budgeting, International Perspectives, and Reimagining Public Managers Delivering Public Value. He's currently working on his 4th book titled Pandemics and Public Management, which I look forward to celebrating with him and with you all in 2022 when it's published. Now, I will outline some of the key areas which this interesting book has highlighted. The book focuses on the digital economy and the public value from the perspective of different stakeholders and agents, namely public managers, civil society, politicians, and private sector. Dr. Chohan's framework is to look at co-creation of value between public managers and of these stakeholders. In that process, the book explores innovative and unique areas such as cryptocurrency, the virtual state, governance by algorithms, parliamentary budget offices, and digital taxation. In other words, it looks at cutting-edge issues in the digital economy to inform public value theory and conversely use the theory to help inform policies for the digital economy. First of all, I would like to invite the guest speaker for today's event, Dr. Jane Fountain, who's a distinguished university professor of political science and public policy at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She's also the director of National Center for Digital Government at the university. Dr. Fountain's current research is focused on institutions and digitalization, specifically on cross-boundary and emergent institutional arrangements. Unfortunately, she could not be with us in person today, but she has graciously provided a recorded talk, which is useful for us to understand the digital government, that area that Dr. Usman has also explored in his book. Professor Fountain discusses the role of government in the virtual state and the digital economy, administrative performance and cross-agency collaborations impact on developing countries' capacity, and also the importance of social capital in the digital economy. Let us enjoy listening to her recorded remarks at this time.
I'm delighted to have been invited to speak at this book launch event. Dr. Usman Chohan has written an important book that examines critical issues that governments must address. He updates an important concept in public management and governance, public value creation, and applies it to several critical issues related to digitalization, cryptocurrency, taxation policies for digital services and platforms, technology assessment, the growing role and importance of decentralized autonomous organization. I've been asked to address 3 questions. First, what is the role of government in the virtual state and the digital economy? Second, how can administrative performance and cross-agency collaboration be improved in developing countries? And finally, what is the importance of social capital in the digital economy, and what investments does government have to make to bolster social capital? Let's revisit the role of government in the virtual state and the digital economy. A leader in public and corporate innovation, Paul Volcker, said recently, our public workforce and government institutions must be dynamic, designed to encourage innovation, leverage technology, and adapt to the needs of a changing nation in an evolving global context. With these values in mind, I want to examine some emerging insights for public management related to what in public policy are called wicked problems, digitalization, particularly artificial intelligence, and critical human skills for civil servants and decision makers. What are wicked problems? In 1973, Riddle and Weber first conceptualized this term in public policy, and it's had a resurgence in the past few years. These are not just difficult problems. Wicked problems are defined as highly interdependent, multi-causal, unstable, and socially complex. They are not simply cross-boundary problems or problems of high complexity. Wicked problems are highly unstructured. The variables of concern are interdependent, multidimensional, and their relationships are complex. So problem definition is a challenge. It's difficult to know when and whether the problem has been solved because there is no clear or obvious solution. A solution has to be crafted and emerges in multiple steps. There is often disagreement about a solution, what constitutes the criteria for a good solution. The best problem solvers can do in these cases is often to identify better or worse solutions. This makes it difficult to develop agreement among stakeholders, to identify and define clear metrics and measures of success. Linear incremental movement toward and through the problem space is impossible or difficult for wicked problems. This also means that computational approaches using big data and artificial intelligence may fundamentally misspecify the problem when we're dealing with wicked problems. Let me talk a bit about building cross-boundary capacity in public management. This relates to how public leaders should approach wicked problems. First, they must involve stakeholders and develop communication patterns to engage those with different sources of expertise, including citizen and local perspectives, as well as private sector and business perspectives. These multi-stakeholder engagements will have to remain open to multiple perspectives for long periods of time during problem solving and the emergence of solutions. Second, to maintain a multi-stakeholder network, public managers should focus on overarching values, fundamental purpose, and a broad guiding vision in order to build coherence and maintain commitment across stakeholders. Third, public managers have to use incremental steps when possible to probe, test, and learn. There's great interest currently in agile management and agile government, an approach that involves experimentation, pilot projects, and learning. From this probing, public managers can then elect a small set of feasible actions to take those further. Public managers need to be in a supportive environment to allow them to experiment. They need a supportive environment to be able to conduct pilot projects, which may or may not succeed. That is their purpose. They can then move forward on the basis of interim partial results while stakeholders continue to refine their understanding of the problem. Public managers should find ways to allow for failure so that innovators can experiment using small-scale pilot projects and then be prepared to scale up if results warrant. Fourth, public managers must be open to a range of scenarios and possibilities for the future. Wicked problems require public management to expect to accept and then manage unpredictability by scanning and monitoring the environment in order to adapt quickly. Much of the current emphasis on agile management, workshops and labs, design thinking, and innovative processes is meant to disrupt linear, structured, routinized thinking and to recognize the wicked nature of many contemporary challenges. Digitalization includes the development, the implementation, and strategic use of a range of computer-based technologies and applications, as you well know, including overlapping areas of AI, computational algorithms, big data, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, and so on. There are obviously enormous benefits to digitalization, greater efficiency, cost savings, increased effectiveness, streamlining and customizing services, greater data sharing, data integration, and data analytics applied to highly complex but stable problems. Among the key challenges of digitalization that are important to public administration are the dislocation of employment and job loss, concerns regarding privacy and data security, the increasing awareness of inequalities that are embedded in some algorithmic decision-making and reproduced, and loss of a human and social context in public management settings. We see this in smart cities and in other settings that become highly digitized. Let's go to the third question about the importance of social capital in the digital economy and what investments governments have to make to bolster social capital. Researchers, including me, have defined social capital as consisting of trust, norms, and networks. Social capital is a critical enabler of innovation because it indicates and suggests a capacity to develop and maintain productive cross-boundary networks that are essential to probing and innovating. What investments do governments need to make? The primary types of investments are twofold. First, there are, of course, investments in the technologies, data collection, analysis, data sharing, visualization, dashboards, cross-boundary data, and other forms of information and analysis critical to digital governments. Governments also need to invest in the training, the recruitment, the retention of public managers and partners who have the skills to use these tools effectively. In addition, governments need to make investments in human capital to develop the types of public managers who not only are technologically competent and expert, but, and these may be different managers, who have a range of human and social skills needed to create and sustain the cross-boundary networks in which problem solving is increasingly done. Here are some of the human skills that AI is unlikely to be able to replace. First, public managers need skills for what is called emotional work involved in supporting, managing, and serving people. These skills include things like nonverbal communication, active listening, the ability to grasp what clients or stakeholders are feeling and to communicate at that level. Public managers also need the ability to show deep empathy. What we mean by deep empathy in design thinking is, and also called radical empathy, is required to get inside the lived experience of end users, various subpopulations, and other clients in order to design processes and analytics effectively and correctly. Second, public managers need skills for building, working, and managing as I have said, in cross-boundary networks and partnerships. These include the ability to bring people together to create and manage teams and to motivate network actors to share knowledge and to develop new knowledge together. The ability to formulate new ideas and to determine their feasibility and paths toward implementation, and the ability to structure and communicate new ideas in ways that will build support, obtain resources needed for implementation, and to manage change. These are apart from and in addition to technological adaptation and innovations. And third, public managers need an orientation toward the future and strategic management skills. Computational models build on data from the past and sometimes cannot effectively guide change for the future. The human skills that are in this category include building and managing strategies for organizational change and institutional change, having a future orientation, and understanding how to absorb and use new technologies and to design organizational arrangements that leverage those technologies. This growth mindset is a key management skill for government. Finally, public managers need the skills to support the workforce during periods of deep change and transformation. This is particularly true for senior executives and managers. These skills will be increasingly important as the kinds of changes in work and in the design of tasks and interactions begin to change as artificial intelligence is further implemented. Let me conclude. Public management has the enormous responsibility to advise government decision makers to transform political decisions into workable programs and services for the public good. During turbulent, rapid change and amid wicked problems, the responsibilities of public management to adapt and to lead increase. Current and future challenges offer rich opportunities for public management to enthusiastically engage in restructuring, innovation, learning, and growth. I wish you the best for a productive book launch seminar and discussion, and wish I could be with you. Thank you.
So now I would request Dr. Usman Chohan, Director of Economic and National Development, to share a detailed presentation of his recently published book by Routledge to guide us through the work that he has developed. Dr. Usman.
President Gass, fellow directors, esteemed researchers, colleagues, it's my pleasure to discuss with you a labor of love. Now, it was not an easy job, but it's a fulfilling one. Digital economy was the subject because, as I had discussed with President Saab once, the problems of developing countries are 18th century problems generally. So you just apply 19th century solutions. But I'm a 21st century man, so I seek out 22nd century solutions to 21st century problems. And so when we talk economy, we're talking digital economy. And the lens that I use, or the theory that I navigate, I'm comfortable with, I enjoy it, is public value theory. I particularly like it because it's very imperfect. It's a mess. And when there is a mess, you have a nice playground as a child to explore. That's why I picked it. So, alhamdulillah, this is the third. And I'm now working on my fourth, which will be on the pandemics, which will be perhaps even more interesting than the digital economy. So CAS has been productive. This is our shared joy. This is CAS's child. Now, the digital economy, it's actually a very vague term. You ask anybody and they don't have clear definitions, although viscerally we understand the cyber nature of economics today. So there's entertainment, there is exchange, there is thought, there is commerce, debate, innovation, and then we consume. But the digital economy is anywhere and everywhere. It's here right now. So it's omnipresent. And yet there's a definitional gap. There's three levels that we talk at. One is that you take the economy as it is and you digitize it, right? Things that you would normally do in the 20th century, you can just digitize them. Then there's the digital economy, which is a level bigger than that. That's where I'm working. And then the digital sector, Johan, that's the smallest version, which is IT purely. And my book is not an IT book. There's three levels we're looking at. So there are three important phenomena in this that we can say as basic principles of the digital economy. One is the mobility. I will send an email to you from here, but I can send you an email living in Fiji or in Canada. The mobility is the big source of production of ideas. The second is the network effects. So the fact that more of us are on there makes it valuable. Facebook's power is that people are not leaving it, but we could all technically migrate to another place. But the fact that there's N+1 people makes it more valuable. So where we are is a source of value, you see? And the third is the usage of data. So we make decisions now informed by things. These are the basic principles, no matter which stratum you talk about. There is several phenomena that accompany it. Datafication. Now there is information about it. And as I've written at CAS in various op-eds and papers, one of our deficiencies as a developing country, and for developing countries as a community, is that they're data-less societies. So it's hard to work with them in the way that in developed countries, they have data on many, many things coming out rapidly, frequently. The second is that you're converting things that would be in the real realm, the analog, into digital, fine. But then you have processes that generate new ideas. So digital economy is a source where there are ideas that simply could not make sense in the physical domain. So it builds upon itself, and that's quite remarkable. And finally, there's the dematerialization. There are things that are in this book which don't have a physical manifestation at all, except for being stored on servers with electricity, but that's the extent of it. So why does it matter? Basically, the digital economy is the most recent major leap. The last comparable phenomena was electricity. Electrification, which happened 200, 300 years ago. Now, at a minimum, it is 5% of global GDP and 3% of employment. But indirectly, we are all participants in it, and we create value in a digital sense. So it's actually very large. And the more you digitalize or digitize both, the more it improves GDP. One estimate is that a 10% increase in what's a digitalization score, this is a multifaceted metric, improves GDP by almost 1%. So the more we digitalize, the more GDP is possible. And on the world map, you see that there is a north-south divide. So taking this path forward helps with the economy. When you ask for solutions about the economy and you're not willing to make the structural reforms, well, then this is another avenue of trying to add that value. What is going on in public value terms? So now, when you write an academic book, I'm speaking to the researchers in particular, when you aspire to write a book, you have to situate it in a literature. And I chose public value, then I have to frame this problem. These are facts on the ground, but then what does it mean in the theory sense? There are actors, there are practices, there's a sphere, and then there is a problem. And you have to define these clearly. So the public value framework is that what I use is the public sector, the bureaucrat, that's the core agent, but then there's civil society, politicians, and then I argue as a theorist that private sector isn't dealt with properly in this theory, that my contribution, and some people also echo this. The practices are, well, the commerce, the exchange, the oversight, the regulation, all of these things that are done. Bureaucrats contribute value. And then there's the sphere, which is actually two. Most public value work is in the real domain, as in the physical material domain. But this has two spheres, and the cross-boundary interaction between them is what's of interest. And it happens at multiple levels. So you as a person engage with it, then as an organization, CAS engages with it, then we as a society engage with it, and then the world engages with it. But the problems are not straightforward. Each chapter looks at a different problem. There is the oversight and control of these things, the security aspects, which is covered by colleagues here in cyber work as well. The equity and inequality problems. Not everybody has the same level of access within societies too, not just between societies. Then the development and the prosperity, as I argued, it's a core for driving value in the 21st century economically. But then empowerment, you as a person, or the monopolization and concentration of power. Look at the power of Facebook and Google and so on. And finally, how do you act as a free citizen? What do you do? Who is monitoring you? Why do they do it? What do they get from you, etc.? So there are big problems. Public value is one of the literatures I could have picked. But public administration has many different discourses, and three are important. One is networked governance. These people, you see, you have to survey the literature to then write the book. That's what your intro particularly has to do. So there's three literatures that talk, and network governance is one that says that you can have networks of institutions that manage it. And so their logic of networks is very comfortable with digital society, because that's also networks of things. Then there's new public management, which doesn't really engage with it. New public management came in the 80s, and that's what the Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan type private sector logic in government did. It wasn't particularly successful. In some ways, it fixed some things, but it messed up others. So it's a very hit and miss sort of thing. Looking back, we say that. Public value has had tangential explorations, I said in the book. It says that there's e-government, and e-government has value. That's very case study oriented. Didn't satisfy me. There are case studies. If you implement this program in this ministry, then this is what, fine. Doesn't really speak to my, and the other is inventories of value. So what do governments believe about this and that? But I had something more to offer. I wanted to talk about value co-creation. Value co-creation is the idea that stakeholders in society can work together in certain spheres, and there's greater value through their co-creative enterprise. So who are the co-creators? As I mentioned, public value has three agents: public managers at the center, and then politicians, civil society, and I had private sector. So the structure of the book emanates logically from this, that in the Venn diagram, wherever they touch, that is where there is some value co-creation. So I looked at bureaucrats and politicians, and then I came up with the concept of parliamentary technology offices being a public value thing. It's not my concept, it exists. But the fact is that it could be a public value case study. Civil society is, as we understand, the creator of cryptocurrency. We don't really know who came up with Bitcoin, for example. But most of the interaction is driven by groups of people, largely anonymous, buying and selling and producing assets. So how do the bureaucrats deal with, how do the public managers deal with cryptocurrency? That became that intersection in the Venn diagram. With private sector, I looked at two things. Public value is ignored, private sector, but it's also quite comfortable with the idea that private sector just does good things, because this theory emanates from Harvard in the 90s, where there was a neoliberal mindset. So it didn't want to ruffle too many feathers when the theorist, Mark Moore, came up with it. It didn't want to bother too many people, so it sort of sidestepped it. So I say, well, if you have that attitude, then public-private partnership is a very logical thing in the digital economy. This is acute. But then I wasn't satisfied with that alone. So I said, well, let's look at antagonistic relationships between public sector and private sector. So there's a second lens in the same chapter. And the second lens is digital taxation. Facebook, Google, and all these, the Silicon Six, badiya yashi kar rahe hain, and they're really enjoying themselves. But they, in terms of taxation, they have structures, decentralization, and they extract you as the resource so that they don't actually contribute as much, some people believe, as they should. So how do you tax digital companies? For Pakistan, we're worried about taxing ourselves, but we are giving this resource to them for free. They don't even have offices here, and we give them our data as their raw material. It's Taxation of that is an interesting digital economy thing, which would have policy impacts here. And finally, public managers dealing with public managers themselves, but the government as the algorithm. So imagine that your bureaucrat of the late 21st century is not a human being anymore. So I'm aiming for an audience 70 years in the future with this, although this technology has been brought out in the last 5 years. This is the schema of the book. So you start with, chapter 2 starts with politicians and public managers. So people in Congress, if you have ever seen the videos, YouTube, of their testimony, they're very out of touch because they did not grow up in this society, a digital society. Congressmen in America, for example, they ask very silly questions. For our generation, hame hasi aati hai sunke, because they just don't know what to ask Mark Zuckerberg when they seated him in front. They don't know. So why don't you have an office in Congress that analyzes dispassionately the impacts on society of this and presents it to both parties for their questioning of Mark Zuckerberg, for example? Like, why don't you have these experts sitting in your parliament, even in Pakistan, an office that is independent, that provides long documents saying this is, and short versions too, this is what is valuable, these are the risks, and independent support of bureaucrats, they're bureaucrats, supporting the politicians, doing technology assessment, TA. It's a great idea. And it's existed before. It existed in the United States. It was introduced in the 70s. But what happened by the 90s when Republicans became extra excited in Congress? There was, at least some of them, Republicans had an anti-science bias. Some Republican congressmen today have an anti-science bias. You see it in these vaccine issues and stuff. They, under auspices such as budget cuts and other pretenses, shut it down. It wasn't particularly expensive, and if you try to measure the value of it, I discuss it in the chapter, it's hundreds or thousands of times whatever it costs to conduct a study if you look at the implications. And at that time, in the 80s, for example, they were forward-looking, studying things like cloning. You know, that was a big deal back then, or genetic engineering. Now we've come across that. Well, in the digital economy, you have a lot of different complex things. Why don't these people advise on that? While it's shut down in the United States, it did continue on in Europe. And most European countries have an equivalent, structured differently. I spent quite a bit of time talking about that. And then they have EU level, supranational versions of technology assessment offices to advise the European Parliament, and they do good work. And so Europe is quite proactive in many places as countries and as on this stuff. So they can advise on many things, and some of it has been done in Europe, but it should be done in America, and it should be done here. You can have an office like this. This is a policy input we can give based on my exploration in the book. And they've worked on things like the collaborative economy, digital sovereign identities, digital single market, inequality, but they're working on this stuff. I think it's a great idea, but we're going back to the future in a sense. So as this cartoon says, why not try these on again? Scientific and technical information. You see, that's, okay. Then we look at civil society, cryptocurrencies. I did a presentation here to you trying to explain it. I myself am always, if I present to you, then within 10 minutes, I'm out of date already. That's how fast it changes. No? But it's an area of research interest, and I have publications. And why do I rank highly in this as an academic? It's basically people took interest in these sorts of publications. Cryptocurrencies is of huge interest to the public, and they want people who are neutral to study this. I'm saying neutral because I've never bought it, so I don't have a stake in its value. It's my integrity as a scholar. So citizen different technology, it was initially meant to be anarchist in its formation, so it's away from government. But then when the price of Bitcoin falls, then there's a hue and cry. When things are good, no complaints. But when cryptocurrency's value falls, then suddenly where's the government to save me? Us waqt phir yaad aati hai. And so government is in a bit of a bind. First of all, you said you don't want us to do this, and now when you're in trouble, you say you want us. So government suddenly comes back to mind. The other thing is, there's a lot of bad things that happen in the cryptocurrency space. It is used for money laundering, trafficking, and even terrorism and stuff. So there is that side where you do need government oversight, or at least they should be aware of what is happening. So you have two values that you're trying to balance out, and value conflict is at the core of public value theory. You have freedom we should be free to do these cryptocurrencies. I don't want the government involved. And then you have the security. Oh, but who's going to protect me when he stole my crypto wallet, which is now worth $1 million? So how do you balance that out? So I looked at the case study that I built was actually 7 institutions. In Pakistan, there's ambiguity on who is in charge of this or what is the ruling. No matter what they say, there's no clarity. I stand by that statement. There's no clarity. As opposed to in the United States, where there's 7 different departments that went ministries or bureaucracies that work on it. Each one treats a different aspect of it. The IRS looks at taxation. Department of Justice prosecutes the criminals. The Securities Exchange looks at it as a security equivalent to the stock market. The commodities, it looks at 2 of the big ones and treats them as commodities like wheat or something. So different people deal with it. And so I discuss how this architecture helps to make it a reasonable investment vehicle where you have freedom to buy and sell, but you are also protected to some degree for some things. And I framed it in the following manner. I'm not going to go into detail. The book is there for that, but this is the public value framing of it, so it adds to the theory. Chapter 4 looks at private power, and I discussed with you that there's the nice public-private partnership view, and then there's the digital taxation stuff. So there's an accommodationist attitude and an oppositional attitude. And in that table, you have some of the private public partnerships that I cover, but I cover briefly because I wanted to dedicate the volume of the chapter to the oppositional one. So governments trying to discuss with these heavyweights, they're not able to persuade them as single governments. Now there is work, actually, since this has been published, to get some unanimity on some basic taxation, but it's not a particularly impressive number that they arrived at because some countries benefit from tax arbitrage. Ireland, for example, is happy to get that investment there and then give them low tax, and then other countries suffer. So trying to bring everybody on the same page is difficult, but something should be done about it because countries like us, when we look at the fiscal deficit, taxing, since we give them the raw material and we use the service, there has to be some exchange rather than exploitation. So digital taxation, I discuss it at quite length, what it means, but $3 billion to 20 developing countries per annum is the loss as it is. And most people do believe, I mean, I'm sure you'd think about it if I asked you, yes, they should pay some form of tax here. They are using this. So I talk about this. And this led me to an insight about the theory itself, which is what you should really arrive at, that public value theory is expenditure oriented. It is asking public managers, how are you expending effort, expending your energies, expending the money, your endowments, your operational resources to create value. But it never talks about how you raise them. Where do the operational resources come from? It doesn't talk about the revenue side. So the theory itself is lopsided. That's what I think is an important contribution, and I situate it in its framework. So public value theorists are missing half of the picture, and they should be working on that. Finally, the digital and analog public managers and their interplay. So if you look at the language of public value theorists in the 90s and 2000s, it's before our time in a sense that technology has moved a lot. So the way it talks about bureaucrats is very humanist. They should have an imagination, a value-seeking imagination, and a drive and an ambition and a sense of service. So it's humanist. But many things that we now have humans do not need to be done by humans, even in the functions of bureaucracies. It's still very rudimentary, but imagine 50 years from now, what could it be like? Your algorithm could be your bureaucrat. So there is something called a decentralized autonomous organization. I did write a paper on this 2017, and it took off. People are interested in it, but the original conception of the DAO was hacked within minutes of its creation. The moment they started, it was hacked. Now, how does it work? You have a set of protocols run by a computer, and if the certain values are hit, the program executes a smart contract, as it is called. So the contract has different clauses, and based on what is triggered in the information it gets, it executes different things. So it could be a kind of bureaucrat in that sense, doing public service delivery based on the contract that it's coded in it. And it would have huge efficiency benefits, but it would have accountability problems. Who is this algorithm answerable to? And what is the basis of the code? And how comprehensive is the smart contract that underlies it? And finally, the equity. So who owns that algorithm and who is it answering to and answering for? That's the theorization of this. So when I really say 22nd century stuff, This is what I was looking at. So I asked public value theorists to whom this book is addressed to go a little bit beyond their comfort zone, that it's not just human beings. The algorithm can be the bureaucrat. So, in conclusion, the reason this is an interesting exploration in my judgment, of course, I'm passionate about it, but the second is that you're answering questions of the 21st century. And public value has many problems. It's a very imperfect theory. It's a kind of thing you teach to a master's level person on a scholarship to Harvard who is going to go back to government, American government or foreign. So it's very nice and soft. That's fine. But then there's problems in societies. One has to take a critical look at them. And that's the playground that I've worked in. And the digital economy is our economy too. You know, to be honest, now you shouldn't talk about digital economy anymore because the economy itself is becoming digital. So in terms of answering the problems of societies in the big picture, that's what I sought to do with this book. So thank you very much. And
thank you, Sir Usman, for sharing your insights regarding the book. The floor is open for the questions. Kindly, anyone wants to ask the question.
For bringing another laurel to CAS, and I think it's I know it's a very a proud moment for you, CAS, and also perhaps for your family, and also your team, whoever supported you in this. I think it was a very profound and bold take on a current topic. I have a simple question of conceptual nature as a student of political science. When you talk about public value and you talk about digital economy, I want your take or perspective on how digital economy is going to affect the social contract of a nation state. How will it affect the distribution of power and authority between society and government? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This is a very profound question. It's simple, but it's actually also a dangerous question. Because the social contract notion is that we all acquiesce consent of the governed, and it has certain stipulations both ways. Public value is very much into consent of the governed, and its formulation is that you are customers. We as citizens are purchasers of the value that the bureaucrat creates. We articulate values, and so they have a twofold response as bureaucrats. They respond to our values as people, but then they create value for us. Now, in the digital economy, that is ruptured by the movement of other forces. Civil society acting, jab hera-pheri kar rahe hain, that is a break in the social contract from civil society's side, and government is trying to preserve, re-mesh the contract. When it is private sector and it has become such juggernauts and they're doing their own things, creating things like the metaverse and extracting more value from you spending time on it, it is rupturing the social contract. Not just because they're taking, but they're also giving in two ways. One is they give us connectivity, but the other thing is they give us distorted worldviews, the fake news, the antagonisms. So they're also giving disvalue to you. And then finally, politicians have been out of touch with the digital economy. Their job is to remain responsive to what society is doing. You can help that with things like PTO, but it isn't necessary. If they don't exist, it's hard to keep in touch. So each of the actors of public value is pushing in directions that can rupture the social contracts.
Dr. Smith, for a wonderful presentation and congratulations again. My question is one on the conceptual basis, because how we look at public value, doesn't it sound antithesis to the digitized, or actually digitization, digital networks actually is an antithesis to the public value theory, because it deconstructs what is being constructed or presented by the public value theory or public value as a concept. Because it undercuts what is being represented by the public value conceptualization, because once we talk about digitization, we are talking about cutting down what humans were supposed to do, and it is actually shifting onto the digitization. And as a result of that, the inherent conflict between the two, I think we are in a perpetual state of where there is one revisionist forces, and then there are status quo forces who are in perpetual kind of contest, and eventually digital force is going to overcome. And earlier the better the governments understand that, as you rightly stated, that the third world countries are really far behind in understanding what's coming in the future. And if you look at how digitization is taking over the economies and the social sector and the overall everything, most of the jobs that are done by the humans will be taken over by the digitization and the AI and so on and so forth. So how do you see that this competition is taking shape, and how ready the governments are, and how strong those revisionist forces are, the status quo forces are, and where do you see the challenge would lie? Because as I see it, my question turning into a comment, as I see it, you see, this is actually the transformation of what Westphalian model of the government was, because now if you look at how Facebook works, how the whole big houses, these digital houses are working, they are the government in their own right, and they are not only creating the policies, they are governing the mindset, they are actually selecting the government. If we see how Facebook is manipulating the political process world over. So where do you see this competition leading to? Because like every transition, this is going to be, I mean, it's not, the competition is not really taking place in the real world, but virtual world competition is actually going to be really problematic. The transition is going to be really problematic. How do you look at that? Sorry for the commented question.
If I could distill what you were getting at into 2 points. The first is the Westphalian model and the nation state. And the second is the contest where technology is actually an antagonistic force, taking away employment. So if I distill your point into 2, I think they're very true. The first is that public value talked about in a naive way, public managed at the national level or at the municipal level, street level bureaucracy. But it didn't talk about public value between nations, and it didn't talk about world government. And there's a big gap. That's why what Professor Fountain discussed about wicked problems, it's a wicked problem for these reasons. And my previous 2 books touched upon this. I used CPEC in my first book as a lens of between nations. So there's China and Pakistan. There are 2 publics, and they co-create value. Because yes, there's a gap in the Westphalian system. The second is, and on that point, the second point is that the Westphalian system might be expiring soon, and it's not even the nations are expiring because societies are reconfiguring themselves as regions, etc. That's true. I agree with you. The second point that you made was about, for example, employment or labor relations or social relations constructed in the economy. And in that, public managers are expected, according to this theory, to create value in a kind of naive way. But what if the values of people are anti-technology, as in, yeah, I need my job, or I need something to be done. Are you just going to disperse handouts to me and not give me a job because I'm not trained to do? Or, for example, one algorithm can do what a lawyer would do. It does in minutes what the lawyer would take 800,000 hours to do. They just can't compete. So they are naive about this. And this is an area I want to pursue further, because perhaps if the values of people are antagonistic to technology, then they should be responding by not doing technology. Maybe. It's a tough question.
Dr. First of all, many congratulations. It's your third one in gas. I remember the first one you launched. So there will be many more. My question is that digital economy helps in taxation and other stuff. So it's overall, as we see that the world is going to go, most of the developed countries are in this process. However, we see that in 2018-19, when India went for digital economy, So, having said that, for the developing countries like Pakistan, and we have like FATF, they want also visibility. What gains we see if the economy is digitized? Will the taxation government will improve, or it will have a negative growth like what we see in India? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Takesh. This is an excellent question because the answer is that it is both. The positive effects would be public service delivery through digitalization. I argue that our biggest problem in society is we don't know, हम जानते नहीं कि यहाँ रहता कौन है और क्या कौन लोग हैं. As a society, we are not aware of one another, and that disrupts social. Having a digital footprint, we have NADRA, we have FBR, we have all of these institutions, and they're working on data sharing, but they're doing it now. They should have done it 20 years ago. That you know a full profile of a person, even though to some degree that pushes intrusion into their lives, yes. But if knowing who they are and what they do, then you can also create value for them, not just that you want to tyrannize them. That's the positive. On the negative side, there are things like FATF. There's a reason I believe that some of our laws remain ambiguous because the FATF rules on it. Now we see FATF in the money laundering or terrorist financing ambit, but the new area that they are working, two areas. One is proliferation, and the fourth is this cryptocurrencies. They've issued guidelines for virtual assets and stuff. We have to be careful with that, and it also stifles our creativity, our engagement, if we want to do these things, but we're also afraid of the FATF specter, which actually came at us for a different reason. So I understand your point, and it's good and bad at the same time.
Third book, Gas. My question is quite simple. If Pakistan is going towards the digital economy, now considering the regional countries around Pakistan, let's say Afghanistan or Bangladesh or other developing nations, if Pakistan is transforming towards the digital economy, how will it impact that those countries who are not switching towards the digital economy? Will there be an impact on Pakistan in terms of dealing with them in trade or something like that? How will it go? Will this affect the performance of Pakistan, or will this reduce its trade relations with other regional countries specifically?
This is a very interesting question. It applies not just to Pakistan versus other countries' digital disparity, but it applies to the world and its digital disparities too. So the people who are driving digital growth, let's say Sweden or United States, they actually face a barrier to the maximum potential they can achieve because we aren't digitalized. We will also face a barrier because our neighbors aren't digitalized. So the full potential comes with maximizing or democratizing access to these technologies so that people then create value. At the same time, the same forces that Sir Pracher raised come. So if there's good stuff happening between nations because there's more parity, bad things can also happen. And so there's a wicked problem for that reason. Yeah.
Not the digital economy. My question is very simple on our Pakistan economy. Digitalization of the process that we have. We often have the government of Pakistan, what I know, is running on a ERP, that is SAP-based ERP. That's supposed to provide all visibility about all the statistics that you have. Despite that, whatever level of digitalization we have in the economy, we continue to have controversies of ghost employees, ghost pensioners, is the growth rate actual or not, and so many other things that are controversial every day we read, should that not be reducing with passage of time and as we go digital, or are controversy? How do the controversy come when the economy is digitalized, or there is an ERP running the economy?
It's a very deep question, sir, because it speaks to the boundary of technology. There are vested interests and social science problems rather than science problems here. You can have the science move forward, but the social science issues of vested interest, politicization, those sorts of things are still at play. The politics is still at play when this is happening. So I believe that our potential as a digital society at times is deliberately limited because there are stakeholders that hold us back. And I believe that that's true for things like monitoring public service ghost employees and all of the issues you raised here. And this is a bigger trend that I allude to in this, that science pushes a boundary constantly. And so you can be outdated on science within a year. But social science essentially, Muhammad Ali will echo me on this, social is essentially the same. Plato has insights for today. The Islamic Golden Age's philosophers and polymaths had insights because society is kind of the same. And so digital doesn't solve those essences.
I agree with you, it's a social science problem. Whatever happens in the economy, when you go through various forums, see discussions and see ministers talking about this, finance minister, and then you attend the forums. How come in this world also today, nothing is visible? Nobody knows what's the interest rate of that CPAC project that Lahore launched. Is it not somewhere in the books, in the digital books, or not? And it's so many other things. You can count 1,000 things that are, nobody is sure of what is a fact.
Yeah, absolutely. There are several reasons why this may happen, and they may all be true at the same time. One is that you may have conflicting data. So this minister said this.
Just to add the same question. Does it not form part of any international forum like IMF? Why don't you push them to make it visible to your own people?
Yes. Actually, this is at the core of public value. Transparency is the driver of public value, and what we lack is transparency. Maybe it's conflicting data, different ministries. Maybe it's that we don't produce things or we suppress data. Then the benefits of the digital economy cannot be dispersed through society. Transparency is a core value, I cannot stress it enough. And we don't have a transparent society for vested interests or for whatever reasons. Illiteracy also plays into it. But your point is well taken, sir. Okay,
So I was just reading in the morning in the newspaper that the Prime Minister is launching something on the sugar product. As a product, nothing should go out of the factory without electronically monitoring it. Okay, so if this gets, we've not been able to measure the water distribution so far, despite the television systems and all that. We had as a measure being taken by the government of Pakistan to use technology for the benefit of the economy.
Yes,
because look at our per capita income, okay, and proportionately look at the number of cars being sold, look at the number of motorcycles being sold, and then look at the people who are hungry. So there's so much disparity. If you get to know the actual things, so our actual per capita income should be much higher than what is being depicted.
agreed, sir.
Similarly, the economy, size of the economy would be much more than what we are saying, 350 billion or whatever it is. But if you start to document all this, or it's available, it will be much more than this.
Yes, I
Our
agree.
state will be much healthier.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. Amna will echo me on this because she did a paper under me on the mystery of capital. So mystery of capital is that if you have property rights, well documented, digitalized, transparency, then capital can create capital on itself. But right now, gaadiyan sabke paas hai, excise tax, that sort of thing. Nobody is giving it. So our measure and understanding of our society is limited. We live in a data-less society, sir. And so the boundary of our possibilities is limited. We know that people are having a better time, but if you try to add the figures, it doesn't add up. I take your point, sir. And technology alone cannot solve that, sir.
Another question comes from mind, and whatever theories, theory or whatever, the discussion on the book in the various chapters, it does not apply here. It applies to the audience, or it applies to different societies and more, I think so, more with the developing country. So would you also comment something, like you were saying,
somehow or the other. Is our education system compatible? Once you talk with the bureaucrats, is our bureaucracy compatible to handle these things? Are our politicians capable enough to handle this? Would you like to comment on this? Or is your theory totally applicable to American society?
The answer is at two levels, sir. One, cash should not be bound by our national constraints. Cash should be at the cutting edge in the world. And so we should be solving things for the world. Cash has a huge potential. So I won't think like a third world man because I live in the third world. We compete with the world. So it doesn't matter if there are constraints here. But at the second level, you're right, that the education system, etc., holds us back. And so, as I said, you can apply 19th century problems to address solutions to our 18th century problems. If you just do that, it's enough to get to where they are, the developed countries. But actually, I would like us to be ahead of them one day. That's why I look to the 22nd century. Otherwise, 19th century problems, what they did, we should do here, both of them. But then, what is the value of me as an economist if I'm just giving 19th century solutions? If I have to make a mark in this world, is it because I was looking forward from here today, sir?
It's very interesting debate, but let me wait to ask the other question, the same subject. If, like Premashi Wasim is saying, the education system is not compatible, it may take another 30 years. I don't think in a lifetime, maybe others get here. So when this bracket manages the national affairs and without a sense of digitalization or e-governance, or so should it not be a country like Pakistan for next 30 years should have a technocrats government rather than having a political government?
Possibly. My
They
suggestion.
would at least be specialists. They will not have these social problems that these political people are going through.
Possibly. There's trade-offs either way. That's why public values is co-create. You work together. A technocratic government has the advantage of expertise in theory, but they're not responsive to society. That's a technocratic solution. GDP per capita, GDP per capita kam kar dein. That's a technocratic solution. And politicians, yes, in theory they respond to the values of the people. They don't here, but in theory they would, but they're not capable of dealing with these things themselves. So, one hybrid solution is the parliamentary technology office. So you have the experts supporting the politicians. So you do have that democratic aspect and you do have the expertise. So we can find hybrid spaces. That's what chapter 2 does.
May I now please request the Honorable President, CAS, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, to conclude the event with his closing remarks.
Dr. Chohan, CAS, staff, it's a very technical subject we're talking. So concluding a technical subject would probably take a longer time. So I'll try to restrict myself to something that will be formal. First of all, let me congratulate you, Dr. Saab, for this wonderful contribution. You and your staff and all those who supported you certainly deserve a lot of appreciation and admiration. If you look at book as an institution, probably would be as old as the human being. In one form or the other, the knowledge has been traveling since ages. However, it's the form of knowledge transfer has been varying and changing as per the dictates of the society. So today also we are seeing a transformation in this institution called the book. We are now getting into, or we are already into the e-books culture, where the libraries from the hard are shrinking to the
e-books, e-libraries. It is cost effective, obviously. The excess, the maximum advantage is that you can access to this institution thousands of miles away within no time. That's a very significant advantage. But I also feel there is some bit of disadvantage of these digitalized books. I'm not talking about digital economy, I'm talking about the books. That those who are used to reading a book with a bookmark and a highlighter, they find it a bit difficult and not with it. So they still want to have a book. That is what is today's, and things will change in due course for something even better. So, Dr. Saab, thank you very much and for contribution. Let me say, contribution in the form of knowledge is pure Islamic. That is the theory of Islam, that you serve the society with what you have. What you have in the form of asset, and knowledge is the biggest asset that one can have. And when you pass it on to others, is a great service to the humanity. And I appreciate your effort of publishing 3 books and online on the way to the 4th one, inshallah. And that's a contribution to the society, to caste and the world at large. So it is not a small step to write books on such technical, professional subjects. Only people like him who have the passion and commitment to their cause can do this. People write books for financial gains. Yes, but this is a totally different domain that he's venturing into. And I know his target, mashallah, and I wish him good luck towards achieving their target. Wherever we are, when he achieves the target, we would like to congratulate him if you're all there. I think I could not agree more with the concept that think tanks, like you're saying, like CAS, have to do one thing, reading. We all have to read to build up the knowledge. We all have to write to express our views and use other media to express the views. Only then you can start to inform the society to take good decisions. Knowledge-based information is the responsibility of think tank to pass it on to all segments of life for benefit. So I think in that context also, Dr. Saab has done a wonderful job by throwing the knowledge, the basket of knowledge around the whole globe. Congratulations once again, Dr. Saab, and that's a good job done. I wish we could have this at a larger scale, maybe next time, inshallah. This time we have limitations, we cannot have it at a large scale, but next time we try and think on those lines. Thank you very much.